Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well today. Well, now let's take a look at the relationship between the current account and the exchange rate. All right, understanding what this means. So now we're complementing the exchange rate chapter with understanding what it means to have the current account, the impact rather, that the current account has on it. So if you think back to the exchange rate chapter, which was the last chapter that we did, or the last series of videos, it mentioned the current account having an impact on the exchange rate, but if you hadn't done balance of payments, then you didn't understand what they were talking about. So here's your chance to figure it out. Okay, so the first scenario we're going to go for is when there's a deficit in the current account. Deficit will equal downward pressure on the exchange rate in the economy. Okay, so deficit in the current account, that means that the current account is negative of the balance of payments, may result in downward pressure on the exchange rate of the currency. Okay, now we're going to divide both of these out into fixed. What happens if you have a fixed exchange rate regime, and what happens if you have a floating exchange rate regime? Okay, a deficit in the current account is more of a problem in a fixed exchange rate than in a floating exchange rate system. Here's why. In a fixed system, right, the implication is the exchange rate has been set too high. Remember, fixed means it's pegged. It's just like, boom, that's the exchange rate tied to another currency. So in the short run, the deficit may be covered by increases in the capital and financial accounts, right? Because the financial account, remember, is going to balance out the current account to end up being zero in order for there to be a balance of payments. So if there's a deficit in the current accounts for a fixed exchange rate, in the short run, it could be covered by a positive outcome in the financial accounts, or, in other words, a surplus, or by the government using reserve assets to balance the accounts. However, this cannot go on indefinitely since the reserve assets will run out. And so in the end, the exchange rate will need to be depreciated, right? Or better said, not depreciated. That's terrible. It'll need to be devalued. That should say devalued. Please fix that in your brains. Devalued. Okay? Cool. In a floating exchange rate, right, the deficit in the current accounts, that's half of the balance of payments equation, implies that there is an excess supply of the currency on the foreign exchange market. Wow, that means that more money has left your country. So if you are the U.S., what does that mean? It means that more dollars, right, have left the United States and are floating out there in the currency exchange. There's an increase in supply. And so what does that mean? Well, since that has happened, the deficit means that more money has left than has come in. This may be because the demand for exports has fallen. People aren't wanting to buy your stuff, as has the demand for the currency, or the demand for the imports has increased, leading to more demand for foreign currencies, and so greater supply of domestic currency is put on the foreign market. What does that mean? All right, well, it means that if you think back to the exchange rate deal, one reason why dollars would be supplied to the market is if people wanted to buy euros. So if people are wanting to buy euros, there's going to be dollars leaving the country, right? Not leaving the country. They're going to be put out onto the exchange rate market. And so there's going to be a surplus out there. Yeah. And so that deficit means that there's more dollars leaving the country. There's more dollars being supplied to the markets than there are dollars being demanded. And as a result, right, then there could be a greater supply of the domestic currency in the foreign exchange market. Or it could just simply mean that the demand for imports has increased. In other words, U.S. people are buying up more things outside, so they're selling their dollars, increasing the supply, and buying European goods. In either case, a freely floating exchange rate system, the exchange rate should fall, improving the competitiveness of the country's exports and increasing the domestic price of imports. Why is the price going to fall? The price is going to fall because the supply of dollars, that's not what I wanted. The supply of dollars has increased on the foreign exchange market. And as a result, that's going to have downward pressure, obviously, on the exchange rate. So the dollar will lose value if the current account runs in a deficit. Okay, that should make sense. It's a lot of complicated language to say a really simple thing, right? If there's a deficit in the current account, that means more money is dollars are leaving the United States, then guess what? The exchange rate is going to go down because the supply of dollars is greater. Hello? Simple supply and demand. You see that? Things come cleanly if you hang in there long enough and think about it long enough and let the information go through your head several times. It really works out well. All right, now let's look at the opposite scenario. So now we're talking about a surplus in the current account of the balance of payments, and that may result in upward pressure on the exchange rate. You could almost like flip it in your mind really fast. So let's just start where we ended. Okay, we'll get to fixed exchange rate in a second. Let's just, for fun, I wasn't planning this, but let's start down here, right, with the floating exchange rate regime, right? We just ended with floating. Let's start with floating. So now there's a surplus. What does that mean? Well, that means that in a floating system, the surplus implies there's an excess of demand for the currency on the foreign exchange market. How do we know that? Well, we know that because there's more money now. There's more money coming into the United States, right? I don't know why I'm using that arrow. I should use my other arrow, right? There's more money coming into the United States than is going out. Okay. So now the demand for dollars is up. If the demand for dollars are up, guess what's going to happen, my friends? People want more dollars. The demand is up, right? The value of the dollar is going to go up because more people want it. Simple supply and demand principles. Okay, so this may be, why else may it be? Let's just finish this. May be because the demand for exports has risen, right? As has the demand for the currency, or the demand for imports has fallen, leading to less demand for foreign currencies, and so a lower supply of domestic currency on the foreign exchange market. So exports, more people want to buy U.S. stuff, so there's money coming into the U.S., right? Yeah, okay, that's gonna decrease the dollar supply, right? Because people are going to be demanding it up, right? As the demand of the currency or demand for imports has fallen. What does that mean? Oh, people don't want to sell their dollars to buy European goods, so they're not selling their dollars. They're holding on to them, which is leading to less demand for foreign currencies, so a lower supply of domestic currency on the foreign exchange market exists. In either case, in the freely floating exchange rate system, the exchange rate should rise, decreasing the competitiveness of the country's exports and lowering domestic price of imports. And in the end, my friends, it all balances out. This is all about balance, 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 one canceling out the other. All right, so that's floating exchange rate. Now let's look at a fixed exchange rate system. In a fixed exchange rate system, if there is a surplus in the current account, the implication is that the exchange rate has been set too low, right? Because there's going to be upward pressure. So the exchange rate's too low. In the short run, this may be offset by deficits on the capital and financial side. So if there's a surplus here, then there's going to be a deficit on the financial account side, or by increases in the reserve assets. In the long run, however, it is likely the country will be unhappy with the artificially low exchange rate and will demand higher rates or will threaten protectionist measures against the country's exports. They're going to have to revalue the currency, raise the currency because of the upward pressure of the current account surplus. All right, my friends, that you thought was complicated. That is not complicated. It's simple supply and demand principles you've been learning about for a semester and a half now. You should be able to figure that out. You got to get the discourse in there. You got to get the language, but this is not beyond anything you can handle. You can do it. It's just using different languages. Think about it as a foreign language using to express logic that's quite simple. All right, my friends, I hope you thought this video was helpful, and we'll talk to you in a bit.